forgotten road. The night was supposed to be uneventful. Just me, a full tank of gas, and a long stretch of highway ahead. I was heading home after a weekend conference in a neighboring state. The drive should have taken 5 hours, maybe 6 if I hit construction or bad weather. I had a playlist queued up, snacks on the passenger seat, and the promise of my own bed waiting for me at the end of the journey. What I didn't plan for was the detour. The first 3 hours passed without incident. The highway was mostly empty, the hum of my tires against the asphalt blending with the low rumble of the engine. The stars were unusually bright that night, their light piercing through the dark velvet sky. I was halfway through my playlist when I saw the sign. Detour ahead, road closed. Great, I muttered, easing off the gas. My GPS hadn't warned me about this, and there were no alternate routes marked. The detour sign pointed down a narrow, unlit road branching off to the right. I slowed to a crawl, the headlights barely illuminating the cracked asphalt and overgrown bushes lining the sides. Just a shortcut, I told myself, turning onto the road. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, the surface pitted with potholes and encroached by weeds. I figured it would loop back to the highway eventually. But it didn't. I drove for what felt like forever. The road twisted and turned, the trees pressing closer with every mile until their branches nearly formed a canopy above me. My GPS lost signal a while back, the screen displaying nothing but a mocking red X. Probably just a dead zone, I muttered, though my voice sounded hollow in the confined space of the car. The longer I drove, the stranger the road became. At first, it was subtle, a faint mist creeping along the ground, the trees seeming darker and more twisted than they had any right to be. Then the potholes grew deeper, forcing me to swerve and slow down to avoid damaging my car. And then there were the signs. The first one I noticed was nailed to a tree, its white paint peeling and faded. Turn back, it read in uneven black letters. I frowned, glancing in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was as dark and empty as the one ahead. Probably just some kids messing around, I said aloud, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. But a mile later, there was another sign, this one propped up on the side of the road. Not safe after dark. I laughed nervously, the sound doing little to dispel the growing tension in my chest. The air inside the car felt heavier, and the mist outside was thickening, curling around my tires like grasping fingers. An hour passed, then another. The road didn't loop back to the highway, and there were no side streets or intersections. Just an endless, winding stretch of crumbling asphalt. My phone was useless, and the fuel gauge had dipped dangerously close to empty. That was when I saw the figure. It appeared suddenly in the beam of my headlights, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly as it came to a stop. My heart pounded as I stared at the figure. It was a woman, or at least it looked like one. She was pale and thin, her long black hair tangled and hanging over her face. She wore a tattered white dress that fluttered slightly in the breeze. I rolled down the window just enough to speak. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't respond. I hesitated, my fingers tightening on the steering wheel. Something about her felt wrong. Her stillness, the way her head was tilted slightly to the side, the faint, unnatural glow of her skin in the headlights. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked into the woods, disappearing into the mist without a sound. I should have turned back right then, but there was no way to know how far I'd come, and I was too afraid of running out of gas in the middle of nowhere. So I kept driving. The mist grew thicker, swallowing the road ahead. I had to slow to a crawl, the headlights barely penetrating the dense fog. Every so often, I'd see something move at the edge of my vision. A shadow darting between the trees, the flash of pale skin. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails against metal. It started at the back of the car, growing louder as it moved along the side. I froze, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. Don't look. The thought wasn't mine, but it was there, clear and insistent. My pulse thundered in my ears as the scratching continued, passing the driver's side door before stopping abruptly. I couldn't help myself. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman was there, sitting in the back seat. Her face was obscured by her hair, but I could see her lips, cracked and pale, curled into a faint smile. I screamed, slamming my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, the engine roaring as I sped down the road. The mist parted briefly, and for a moment I thought I was free. Then the car stalled. The engine sputtered and died, the headlights flickering out, leaving me in complete darkness. No, 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 I muttered, turning the key in the ignition again and again. The engine refused to start. The air inside the car grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me, heavy and suffocating. I didn't dare look in the mirror again. A faint whisper filled the air, low and distorted, like a voice dragged through water. "Why did you come here?" My breath hitched. I fumbled with the door handle, desperate to get out, but it wouldn't budge. "You shouldn't have come." The whisper was closer now, right behind my ear. Something cold brushed the back of my neck, and I screamed, kicking the door open and tumbling out onto the cracked asphalt. I scrambled to my feet, the mist swirling around me like a living thing. The woman stood in front of the car, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her hair parted just enough for me to see her eyes, black voids that seemed to pull the light from the air. "Stay," she whispered, her voice echoing inside my skull. I turned and ran. I don't know how long I ran or how I found my way out. The road seemed endless, but at some point, the mist began to thin, and the trees gave way to open fields. When I stumbled onto the main highway, a trucker stopped and picked me up. He didn't ask many questions, just muttered something about sticking to the main roads. I never found my car. The police said the road didn't exist, that there was no detour in that area. But sometimes, late at night, I see the mist again, creeping at the edges of the highway, and I know she's still out there, waiting for someone else to take the wrong turn. The endless route. I didn't think much about driving late at night. It wasn't my first time, and I'd always enjoyed the solitude of the open road. This time, though, it wasn't a choice. My boss had kept me late at the office, and by the time I'd wrapped up, it was well past 11 p.m. I had a 3-hour drive ahead of me, heading back to my small apartment in a quiet, rural town. It was the dead of winter, and the cold seemed to seep into every crack and crevice of my car. Snowflakes danced in the air, catching the headlights in a shimmering, hypnotic display. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, the trees flanking it appearing as dark sentinels under the dim moonlight. I wasn't worried. Not yet. About an hour into the drive, I realized I hadn't seen another car for miles. Normally, that wouldn't bother me, but something about the silence outside, the absolute stillness, felt unnatural. Even the radio was picking up nothing but static, so I turned it off. That's when I saw the sign. Route 117, next exit. It wasn't a route I remembered seeing before, but I wasn't paying close attention to my GPS. It recalibrated as I approached the exit, the robotic voice announcing, recalculating, proceed on Route 117 for 23 miles. I trusted it. Why wouldn't I? I turned onto the exit ramp, and the highway disappeared behind me, swallowed by the forest. The new road was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars, and lined with dense, skeletal trees. My high beams illuminated the pavement ahead, revealing cracks and faded yellow lines. The feeling of unease started to grow. About 15 minutes in, I noticed how poorly maintained the road was. The asphalt had degraded into patches of gravel, and the potholes were so deep I had to swerve to avoid them. There were no streetlights, no reflective markers, just the suffocating darkness pressing in on all sides. I glanced at the dashboard. My phone had no signal, and the GPS had stopped speaking. The screen displayed nothing but a spinning wheel, as if it too was unsure of where I was. A chill ran down my spine, and I laughed nervously to myself. "It's fine," I muttered. "It's just a shortcut. I'll be back on the main road soon." The first sign of real trouble came when I passed a mile marker. It read, Mile 3. A few minutes later, I passed another one. Mile 3. I blinked, certain I'd misread it. But 5 minutes after that, I saw it again. Mile 3. My heart started pounding. "No way," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. That doesn't make sense. I slowed the car, squinting at the marker as I rolled past it. There was no mistake. It was the same number. I sped up, desperate to get off this road, but the markers continued. Mile 3, mile 3, mile 3. Panic set in. I checked the time on the dashboard. 12:47 a.m. Then I checked again a few minutes later. It still read 12:47 a.m. No, I muttered, tapping the clock as if that would fix it. My phone, usually my lifeline in situations like this, was useless. A dead black screen despite having been fully charged when I left. The road began to twist and turn in impossible ways, the curves sharp and unnatural. My headlights barely illuminated the next bend before I was forced to turn the wheel. I started to feel disoriented, like the car was moving in circles. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just feet from them. My heart thundered as I stared at the figure, my hands shaking on the wheel. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was dressed in dark, tattered clothes, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His face was pale and expressionless, and his eyes didn't seem to reflect the light. He didn't move. I rolled down my window an inch, just enough to call out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. He took a single step forward. I panicked, slamming my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as the car lurched forward, and for a moment, I thought I'd hit him. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the road was empty. He was gone. I drove faster now, ignoring the potholes and cracks that rattled the car. My chest felt tight, my breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. The forest around me seemed to close in, the trees leaning over the road as if trying to trap me. And then, in the distance, I saw lights. Relief flooded through me as I sped toward them, thinking it must be a gas station or a rest stop. But as I drew closer, my stomach dropped. The lights were from my car. It was parked in the middle of the road, headlights blazing, engine idling. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not possible." I stopped and stared at the impossible sight. My car, an exact replica down to the dent on the front fender, was blocking the road ahead. The driver's side door was open, and I could see a shadowy figure sitting in the driver's seat. Turned its head to look at me. I don't know what I saw in that moment, whether it was my reflection, a twin, or something else entirely, but its face twisted into a smile, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run. I reversed wildly, spinning the wheel as I tried to turn the car around. The tires skidded on the loose gravel, and the engine roared as I pushed it to its limit. I didn't care about the direction, I just needed to get away. But the road didn't end. It twisted and looped, bringing me back to the same spot every time. Each pass, the doppelganger in my car seemed closer, its grin wider, its eyes darker. And then, during one loop, I didn't see the other car at all. For a moment, I thought I was free. Then I glanced at my rearview mirror. It was sitting in my back seat. I screamed, slamming on the brakes and throwing the door open. The cold air hit me like a wall as I stumbled out, falling to my knees on the frozen asphalt. The car's headlights flickered, then died, leaving me in total darkness. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, slow and deliberate. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. The footsteps stopped. I turned, but there was nothing there, just the endless road stretching into the void. I don't remember how I got out. I woke up hours later, lying on the shoulder of the highway, my car parked safely a few feet away. The engine was cold, and the gas tank was full, as if I'd never driven anywhere. When I checked my phone, it was 6 a.m., the time perfectly normal. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm still on that road, still trapped in some way. Every time I drive at night, I see mile markers repeating in the distance. And sometimes, if I look too long in the mirror, I see a shadow in the back seat, waiting. The long night. The clock on my dashboard blinked 11:47 p.m. as I pulled onto the dark stretch of highway. The hum of my tires against the asphalt was the only sound keeping me company. My weekend at my sister's had been great, but I hadn't planned on staying so late. Now I was left with a 3-hour drive home, alone. I didn't mind night drives. Something about the quietness of the road was soothing. My car was stocked with snacks, and my favorite playlist played softly in the background. The snowflakes outside reflected off the beams of my headlights, creating an illusion of driving through a tunnel of stars. But as the miles ticked by, something felt off. It started small, almost imperceptible at first. I'd glance at my GPS and notice it recalculating. I wasn't too worried, spotty reception was normal this far out. But the GPS's voice kept repeating, "Turn right in 1 mile," except there was no right turn. Just trees and a horizon swallowed by darkness. I dismissed it. Technology, I muttered, shaking my head. Then came the road signs. They were old and rusted, with faded letters that barely reflected in the headlights. Route 191. I didn't recognize the name, but my GPS had me on this road for another 40 miles, so I stayed the course. 20 minutes later, the signs disappeared altogether. The road narrowed as the forest crept closer. The once clear highway became riddled with cracks and potholes, forcing me to slow down. I hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour, and the radio had dissolved into static. The air in the car felt heavier, colder, despite the heater working fine. And then I saw something or someone standing on the shoulder ahead. I instinctively slowed down, squinting through the windshield. My headlights revealed a man in a dark coat, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He stood motionless, hands at his sides. I debated stopping, but a deep unease gripped me. Something about him didn't feel right. As I approached, his head turned, and though his face remained in shadow, I swore I saw his eyes glowing faintly. I hit the gas, my heart racing. My rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness where he'd stood moments before. The road stretched endlessly, each mile feeling longer than the last. The trees on either side were dense, their skeletal branches clawing at the night sky. At some point, I noticed the mile markers were repeating. Mile 15. Then, a few minutes later, mile 15. At first, I thought it was a mistake or my exhaustion playing tricks on me. But when I passed mile 15 for the 4th time, my unease turned into full-blown panic. I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Just a mistake," I whispered, trying to calm myself. The silence outside was deafening, pressing against the car like a living thing. No wind, no rustling leaves, nothing. I turned off the engine to conserve gas and reached for my phone, but it was dead. It had been at 75% when I left. My breath fogged up the windows as I stared out into the darkness, debating my next move. Then, I heard it, a faint tapping on the driver's side window. I froze, my hand hovering over the ignition. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned my head slowly. Nothing, just the empty road and the black void beyond the trees. I exhaled shakily, but before I could fully convince myself it was my imagination, the tapping shifted, now on the passenger side. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer. I slammed my hand on the ignition, and the car roared to life. I didn't wait to see if someone or something was outside. My tires screeched as I tore back onto the road. I drove faster than I should have, the potholes rattling the car as I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The mile markers continued to repeat. Mile 15. Mile 15. I thought I was going mad until I saw something new. A gas station. Relief flooded through me as I pulled in, my headlights illuminating the small, dilapidated structure. The lights inside flickered, but it was better than nothing. I parked near the pump and stepped out, the cold biting through my jacket. The station looked ancient, with peeling paint and a sign that barely clung to the roof. I peered inside, hoping to find someone, but the place seemed abandoned. The shelves were empty, the counter covered in dust. The door creaked as I stepped inside. "Hello," I called out. My voice echoed in the emptiness. Behind the counter was a dusty rotary phone. I picked it up, desperate to call for help, but there was no dial tone. As I set it down, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure standing near the edge of the forest, just beyond the gas station. It was the man in the hat. I bolted out of the station, jumping back into my car and locking the doors. My fingers fumbled with the keys, adrenaline coursing through me. The headlights flicked on, illuminating the figure directly in front of the car now. His face was still hidden in shadow, but I could see his hand, bony and pale, slowly lifting to point at me. I screamed and floored the gas pedal. The car surged forward, but the figure didn't move. As the car passed through where he stood, he vanished, leaving nothing but the dark road behind. I didn't stop driving. Couldn't. My mind raced as the trees blurred past, their branches appearing to twist and reach for the car. Then I saw something up ahead, a break in the road, where it curved sharply to the right. Relief washed over me. Maybe I was finally off this cursed route. But as I rounded the bend, my stomach dropped. There was a familiar sight ahead, the gas station. No, no, no! I screamed, slamming the steering wheel. I sped past it, refusing to stop, and that's when I noticed the figure again. He was standing on the roof of the station, his glowing eyes following me as I drove. The road seemed endless, looping back on itself no matter how far I drove. The clock on the dashboard was frozen at 1:13 a.m., and the fuel gauge remained stuck, as though the car itself was trapped in time. My thoughts grew foggy, my grip on reality slipping. I began to wonder if I'd ever make it home, or if I'd even left at all. The last thing I remember is seeing the mile marker again. This time, it didn't read mile 15. It read mile 0, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was parked on the shoulder of a highway, the morning sun breaking over the horizon. My car was fine, my phone had battery, and the fuel gauge was back to normal. I checked the GPS. It was recalibrating, showing I was less than 10 miles from home. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not entirely free. Every time I drive at night, I catch glimpses of the figure in the shadows, his wide-brimmed hat just visible in the rearview mirror. And I know that one day, the road will call me back.